Anthony Quinn stayed silent for decades, and when he finally chose to speak about Charles Bronson, it didn't just spark curiosity, it forced people to rewind time back to the very beginning of a life forged through struggle, survival, and constant reinvention. Long before fame ever learned his name, the man the world would one day know as Anthony Quinn entered the world as Manuel Antonio Rodolfo Quinn Oaxaca, born on April 21, 1915 in Chihuahua, Mexico, a name history nearly forgot, but a life that would prove impossible to overlook. From his earliest days, Quinn's journey became living evidence that resilience is rarely gifted. It is learned through hardship, shaped by pressure, and sharpened by necessity. Born to a Mexican father of Irish descent and a Mexican mother, difficulty arrived in his life long before opportunity ever knocked. Comfort was never part of the plan, and security was something he learned to live without. As a young boy, his family crossed the border into Los Angeles, where poverty quietly took hold of his childhood and began molding both his character and his relentless ambition. Every day carried weight, and every decision mattered. To help keep his family afloat, Quinn took whatever work he could find, boxing, construction, and other punishing manual labor that tested his body long before Hollywood would ever test his talent. These were not stepping stones, they were survival tools. Those early years of exhaustion, pain, and endurance would later become the unseen foundation of his performances, the grit in his eyes, the tension in his movements, and the raw authenticity audiences could feel but never fully explain. Yet the moment that altered his direction did not arrive under studio lights or in front of a camera. It came quietly through his growing love for art and architecture. That passion eventually placed him under the guidance of the legendary Frank Wright Wright, a mentor who recognized something extraordinary in Quinn long before casting directors ever did. Wright saw depth, intensity, and a presence that couldn't be trained, only uncovered. It was Wright who encouraged him toward acting, sensing a powerful emotional force waiting to be unleashed. With that single push, Quinn stepped onto a path that would slowly and then unmistakably reshape his destiny. When he entered Hollywood in the 1930s, opportunity arrived with strings attached. Doors opened, but only part way. The industry repeatedly confined him to small, tightly defined ethnic roles, a harsh reminder of the rigid studio system that dominated the era. Talent was acknowledged, but rarely trusted. Still, Quinn refused to let typecasting become a prison. Instead, he refined his craft quietly, patiently, and with an unshakable belief that his moment would come. By the early 1950s, something changed. His performances carried a depth and emotional gravity the industry could no longer ignore. Roles that lingered, characters that felt lived in and painfully real. Then came Viva Zapata in 1952. Playing Eufemio Zapata, the volatile and deeply conflicted brother of revolutionary Emiliano Zapata, Quinn delivered a performance that cracked Hollywood wide open. It wasn't just acting, it was revelation. That role transformed his career overnight. It earned him the Academy Award for Best Supporting Actor, making him the first Mexican-born actor ever to win an Oscar. For many, that would have been the summit. For Quinn, it was only the beginning. Just 4 years later, he captured a second Academy Award for Lust for Life in 1956, delivering a haunting and emotionally layered portrayal of painter Paul Gauguin, a role that showcased his range, vulnerability, and fearless commitment to character. When the applause finally faded, Anthony Quinn had achieved something far greater than fame or accolades. He had carved out a permanent place in Hollywood history, not just as an actor, but as one of the most emotionally commanding, resilient, and unforgettable performers the industry had ever known. Few performances in the entire history of cinema have the power to permanently redefine an actor's life the way Anthony Quinn's electrifying transformation into Alexis Zorba did in Zorba the Greek in 1964, a single role that didn't merely elevate his career, but quietly reshaped how the world would remember him forever as a true cinematic legend. From the very first moments audiences met Zorba, the line between character and man seemed to dissolve. To viewers across continents, Zorba felt inseparable from Quinn himself, exuberant yet reflective, fiercely passionate yet quietly philosophical, overflowing with humor, pain, and an unmistakable hunger for life that pulsed through every scene. That one unforgettable performance did more than win applause. It earned Quinn an Academy Award nomination for Best Actor, and almost overnight opened the doors to an entirely new generation of fans around the globe, viewers who would come to know his face, his voice, and his emotional intensity as symbols of something far deeper than fame. But Zorba was never just a role on a screen. Over time, the character evolved into a powerful and enduring symbol of joy, resilience, and the unbreakable force of the human spirit. In many striking ways, those very ideals mirrored the way Anthony Quinn chose to live his own complicated, restless, and relentlessly creative life. Across an extraordinary and almost unimaginable career span, Anthony Quinn appeared in more than 150 films, moving effortlessly between genres, cultures, and even languages, shifting from one world to another with a rare confidence that few actors of his era could match. Among his most unforgettable portrayals were towering historical and spiritual figures, including Jesus Christ in Lostrada, Barabbas in Barabbas 1961, and the fiercely magnetic Auda Abu Tai in Lawrence of Arabia 1962. Each performance became another milestone, another marker in a career defined not by comfort, but by constant reinvention and emotional truth. Away from the camera, that same creative fire refused to be confined by a single craft. Anthony Quinn expressed it through painting, sculpture, and writing, artistic paths he pursued with the same urgency and passion that had driven his acting career. Displayed in galleries around the world, his artwork reflected a lifelong fascination with beauty, form, heritage, and cultural identity. For Quinn, creativity was never meant to live inside one narrow discipline. He approached every artistic pursuit, whether on canvas, in stone, or in the page, with the same fearless intensity that had shaped his performances on screen. Through his books and memoirs, he invited readers into a restless and searching mind, one constantly wrestling with identity, purpose, ambition, and the true meaning of success in a world that often measures worth by applause. Yet off-screen, Anthony Quinn's personal life proved to be just as intense, layered, and emotionally charged as the larger-than-life characters he brought to cinema. Over the course of many decades, his marriages and relationships revealed both a deep devotion to family and a persistent struggle to control his own impulsive nature. His first marriage, to actress Catherine DeMille in 1937, placed Quinn directly inside one of Hollywood's most powerful and tightly guarded inner circles. Catherine was the adopted daughter of legendary director and producer Cecil B. DeMille, at the time one of the most influential and commanding figures in the entire film industry. For a young man who had grown up in poverty after immigrating from Mexico, and who had already endured years of rejection, small parts, and professional uncertainty, this marriage represented far more than romance. It offered emotional stability, social protection, and a rare professional doorway into a world that had previously felt sealed shut. Through the DeMille family, Anthony Quinn gained access to influential networks that helped move his early career forward, even as he remained determined to prove, both to himself and Hollywood, that his success would be earned on his own terms. Throughout their long marriage, Anthony and Catherine raised 5 children and for many years presented to the public the image of a stable, respectable, and thriving Hollywood family. An image that quietly masked the personal tensions and emotional struggles unfolding behind closed doors. Behind the curtain of Anthony Quinn's rising fame, while the cameras rolled and applause grew louder, Catherine was working just as hard in the shadows, holding their fragile world together. She poured herself into building a stable home, believing that if she could create enough grounding, his career could climb safely from small, forgettable roles into the kind of dramatic breakthroughs that promised permanence. But as the spotlight intensified, something else was unfolding quietly. Beneath the success, Quinn's inner turmoil, explosive temper, and unrelenting hunger for new experiences began eating away at the marriage from the inside out. With every milestone he reached, the rumors followed close behind. Whispers of infidelity didn't fade, they multiplied, growing louder until they became inseparable from his public image. Years later, Quinn would no longer deny it. He openly admitted that impulse, ego, and a constant craving for both emotional and physical stimulation repeatedly pulled him away from commitment, no matter how much damage it caused. Each betrayal struck deeper than the last, chipping away at the trust Catherine had spent decades trying to preserve. What she once fought to protect slowly became impossible to hold together. By the time nearly 30 turbulent years of love, success, compromise, and resentment had passed, the marriage finally collapsed in 1965, closing a long, painful chapter that had been unraveling for years. Still, Quinn did not remain alone for long. Just 1 year after his first divorce, in 1966, he married Yolanda Adalori, a much younger Italian costume designer, who appeared to offer exactly what his past no longer could, a clean slate. To Quinn, Yolanda brought with her a refined European sensibility and a creative spirit that made life feel fresh again, at least for a while. Together they welcomed 3 children, and for a brief stretch of time, Quinn seemed sincerely devoted to building another family, splitting his life between Hollywood and Europe as if balance had finally been achieved. Behind the scenes, Yolanda became deeply woven into every part of his existence. She managed the household and supported his demanding lifestyle, while Quinn continued acting, painting, writing, and traveling almost non-stop. Yet beneath this carefully constructed stability, familiar cracks began to form. During his marriage to Yolanda, Quinn carried on a long-term relationship with Fradel Dunbar, fathering 2 children with her and sustaining a parallel life that could not stay hidden forever. When the truth surfaced, it ignited emotional fallout and legal battles that shattered any remaining illusion of order. And that was far from the only shadow trailing him.
Over the years, Quinn was widely rumored, and in some cases openly acknowledged, to have been romantically involved with several of Hollywood's most legendary actresses, including Carole Lombard, Rita Hayworth, Ingrid Bergman, and Maureen O'Hara. Whether these encounters were brief sparks or longer tangled affairs, the stories only reinforced the image that followed him everywhere. A man of overwhelming charisma and intensity, celebrated for his brilliance, yet remembered just as vividly for the heartbreak left in his wake. By the time the 1990s arrived, the once rock-solid marriage between Anthony Quinn and Yolanda Adalori had disintegrated completely, leaving behind a trail of heartbreak that seemed impossible to mend. The marriage's breaking point hit when Quinn's secret relationship with his secretary, Catherine Benvin, came to light, an affair that not only shook the foundation of his family, but also introduced 2 more children into his already complicated personal life. Years of betrayal, whispered rumors, and public embarrassment had stacked up like an unrelenting storm, and finally, the emotional pressure became unbearable. In 1997, the marriage collapsed in a bitter, headline-grabbing divorce that left onlookers both shocked and captivated. The split didn't just make the tabloids, it sparked endless speculation and gossip, exposing the deep, unresolved scars left by decades of conflict. But life moved forward, as it always does. After this dramatic chapter, Anthony Quinn married Catherine Benvin, the woman at the center of the storm, solidifying a union that had already reshaped his personal world in ways no one could anticipate. Even in his later years, Quinn threw himself wholeheartedly into family life once more, embracing fatherhood with energy and pride, showing the world that he wasn't done nurturing, loving, or celebrating the children in his life. This marriage became a striking study in contrasts, a continuation of his desires, yet also a reflection of the choices that had haunted him for decades. Throughout his legendary career, Anthony Quinn was constantly asked about the titans of Hollywood he had known, his peers, and the men who shared his on-screen intensity. Yet, when the conversation turned to Charles Bronson, Quinn often held back, offering only silence and measured words at first. The two were frequently compared, both rugged, magnetic, and dangerously compelling in front of the camera. But Quinn remained cautious, as if guarding a private understanding of Bronson that the public had never seen. It wasn't until his later years that Quinn finally opened up, sharing candid, thoughtful reflections about the man behind the legend. Quinn revealed that Charles's public persona had often been misinterpreted. People assumed Charles was this unyielding wall of stone, he said, leaning into the truth of his observation. But that exterior was armor. Beneath it, he was a man who had clawed his way up from nothing. Speaking from his own experiences with poverty, hardship, and relentless struggle, Quinn recognized in Bronson a reflection of his own battles, a kindred spirit forged in resilience. Both men had endured hunger, relentless pressure, and the harsh realities of survival, trials that left permanent marks on their characters and shaped the intensity they brought to every performance. Reflecting on Bronson's craft, Quinn dismissed any notion that his peer was shallow or one-dimensional. Charles didn't waste words, Quinn explained, but every gesture, every glance told a story. There was depth in everything he did, even in silence. Every slight movement, every measured pause told a story that went far beyond the script. Mastering such control wasn't just skill, it required relentless discipline, a mind sharp enough to communicate volumes without uttering a single word. Quinn often found himself mesmerized by Bronson's quiet authority. On screen, Bronson commanded attention not through flamboyance or theatrics, but through a simmering intensity that seemed to draw viewers in, holding them captive in the sheer gravity of his presence. Yet off-camera, there was a layer to Bronson that most never saw, one Quinn felt he had to confront head-on. He was a man who guarded himself fiercely, Quinn admitted, his voice tinged with understanding rather than judgment. That caution, he explained, wasn't arbitrary, it had roots. Coming from their rough-and-tumble beginnings, trust wasn't freely given, it was earned in small, measured doses. Bronson's toughness wasn't about ego or bravado. No, it was armor, a shield forged by early lessons in vulnerability, that showing weakness could be a weapon in someone else's hands. Those hard-earned lessons shadowed every role he inhabited, every scene he dominated. Even though we shared so many similarities, Quinn reflected, we were almost opposite in the ways that mattered. Charles gravitated towards solitude, while Quinn thrived in the chaos of people, noise, and unpredictability. He needed silence to recharge, distance to strategize. I needed the storm to feel alive. Quinn never mistook Bronson's methods for arrogance. He saw the strategy, a man navigating an industry intent on softening actors into something digestible, something marketable. Bronson's silence, his restraint, was his way of keeping control over a world that often demanded surrender. Perhaps the most striking revelation Quinn offered was the mark Bronson left on audiences. Charles wasn't just a screen presence, he became a symbol, not merely of revenge or fury, but of resilience, of the unbroken worker, the man who bore life's hardships in every line of his face. Audiences recognized a truth in him. They saw struggle, endurance, and a raw authenticity that Hollywood rarely allowed to shine. Quinn's intention in speaking was never to mythologize Bronson, but to humanize him. He wasn't flawless, Quinn admitted, but he was real. There was integrity in his strength, a rare honesty in a place built on illusion. And in that acknowledgement, Quinn offered a tribute not of gossip, but of comprehension, respect born from shared experience, empathy forged through survival, and a recognition of a kindred spirit. In the twilight of his own life, Quinn withdrew from Hollywood's relentless glare. Bristol, Rhode Island, became his sanctuary, a quiet refuge far from flashing lights and endless applause. There, surrounded by simplicity, he discovered solace. He savored reflection, cherished privacy, and allowed himself to linger over the boundless sweep of Narragansett Bay, a horizon stretching like a silent promise after decades of creative intensity and unforgettable performances. On June 3, 2001, the city of Boston fell silent, mourning the passing of Anthony Quinn at the age of 86. He succumbed to respiratory failure, a tragic culmination of complications from radiation treatment for lung cancer. Yet his death was more than the end of a life. It marked the closing of a chapter on a story that had crossed oceans, bridged cultures, and inspired generations of actors and audiences alike. Quinn's journey through the world of cinema left a mark so indelible that few could ever hope to rival it, a legacy built on talent, resilience, and an unwavering devotion to the art of storytelling. News of his passing rippled across the globe, eliciting grief and reflection from fans, fellow actors, and admirers who remembered him as a figure larger than life, fierce in his passions, commanding in his presence, and profoundly human both on and off the screen. He was a man whose depth of emotion and intensity could make hearts race, tears flow, and imaginations soar, and for many, his characters became mirrors of their own struggles, triumphs, and dreams. The funeral was held at the historic First Baptist Church in America, tucked away on College Hill in Providence, Rhode Island. Its walls, steeped in centuries of history, provided a solemn yet majestic stage to honor a life that often seemed larger than legend itself. Within that timeless sanctuary, friends, family, and colleagues gathered not just to mourn, but to celebrate a career that had redefined the very idea of a leading man, one who could embody strength and vulnerability in equal measure. In a move that was both deeply intimate and extraordinary, Quinn's wife petitioned the town of Bristol for a final resting place unlike any other. Rather than a traditional cemetery, she requested that he be laid to rest in the sanctuary he had loved most, the backyard of his own home. The property, purchased by the couple in 1995, had been a place of peace and inspiration, with sweeping views of the bay and a sense of serenity that had captivated them from the very first moment. There, beneath the sprawling branches of a majestic maple tree that had stood watch over the land for decades, Quinn would rest in the quiet embrace of the place he called home. Authorities in the town honored the family's request, recognizing the profound connection between the actor and the land he cherished. It was a final gesture of respect, allowing Quinn's life to come full circle, a life defined by courage, artistry, and a relentless pursuit of meaning, now at peace in the place that gave him so much.